Pamela Rose Aldrich McCall was born in Cedar Rapids in Iowa. She was described by her mom as free-spirited and transient. Pamela would often hitchhike through Virginia and Tennessee. In 1991, that was exactly what she was doing, living in Virginia and hitchhiking to different areas. On March 10, 1991, just after 12 p.m., the Spring Hill Police Department responded to a report of a body located on Saturn Parkway at an off-ramp for Port Loyal Road. The body belonged to a white female. The female had torn clothing, undergarments, and obvious injuries to the face and neck. Using her fingerprints, she was identified to be 33-year-old Pamela Rose Aldrich McCall. It was concluded that Pamela had been strangled. Sadly, it was also discovered that she had been 24 weeks pregnant at the time her life was taken. The unborn child did not survive. Some witnesses did come forward, telling the police that Pamela had been traveling with a truck driver. The statements from the witnesses and DNA evidence collected from the crime scene was all the police had to go on. It was not enough, and the case went cold. In April of 2019, the Spring Hill Police Department reopened the case. The investigator working the case submitted the evidence they collected back in 1991 to a crime lab for DNA analysis. The analysis helped them create a full DNA profile, and they now knew the man they are looking for is a white male. The profile was then entered into the CODIS database. The DNA matched the DNA that was recovered at two other unsolved cases from Wyoming in 1992. The police now knew that whoever ended the life of Pamela and her unborn child also took the lives of at least two other victims. They just needed to find out who that man is. A lot of state and federal agencies then had to work together to find the man. This included the FBI, US Secret Service, Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigations, and the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations. Finally, their investigation resulted in 59-year-old Clark Perry Baldwin being identified as a suspect in Pamela's case, as well as the two Wyoming cases. Baldwin was a former truck driver and resident of Waterloo, Iowa. In May 2020, he was taken into custody by police, and he will now finally serve time for his crimes after all these years. 8-year-old Kelly Ann Prosser lived in Columbus, Ohio with her family. On September 20, 1982, Kelly Ann was walking home from Indianola Elementary School. Somewhere between her home and the school in the Columbus University District, she was abducted. When Kelly Ann did not arrive home, her mom, Linda Prosser, got worried. She called the school, but they had no idea where she was. The police was then called, and a search for her started. Then, 2 days later, on the 22nd, Kelly Ann's body was found in a nearby cornfield in Madison County. She had been assaulted and strangled. The Columbus Police Department launched an extensive investigation. They preserved all the evidence from the crime scene so that it could be used later. The police department also questioned a lot of people, but sadly they could not gather any useful information and the case went cold. In 2015, the DNA they found at the crime scene was entered into the CODIS database. Unfortunately, no matches came out of the database. In March 2020, the police department partnered with Advanced DNA, a forensic genealogy research company, which used a DNA sample to assemble a family tree for the potential suspect and provide additional leads for the detectives. With more DNA testing and some investigative work, the police finally had their man, Harold Warren Jarrell. In 1977, Harold abducted a different 8-year-old girl also in Columbus. He was sent to prison but released in January 1982, just 8 months before the abduction of Kelly Ann. Her family was thankful to the police department. They do not however feel that they have closure or justice since Harold passed away. He lost his life in Las Vegas in 1996 at the age of 67. He would have been 53 years old when he abducted Kellyanne. In a statement, the family had this to say: "When Kellyanne left for school the morning of September 20, 1982, we did not expect our time with her would abruptly end, or that our future would change in every way imaginable. One moment we had this dazzling, mischievous, 8-year-old little girl. Then suddenly, all we had left were memories, photographs that will never age, a calendar marking a dreadful new holiday, a grave, and pieces of Kelly's life stored in a box."
23-year-old mother of two, Betty Lee Jones, lived in Boulder County, Colorado back in 1970 along with her husband. She and her husband, Robert Ray Jones, had only been married for 9 days. The last 2 of those days, the pair spent arguing. Their last argument took place on March 8, 1970, in their home that was located in Denver, at 12th Street and York Street. It culminated in Robert leaving the residence in his car, and Betty trying to flag down cars in the street near their residence. Betty was last seen climbing into a blue sedan that had stopped. The car then went southbound on York Street. This happened at about 3:30 p.m. The next day, on March 9th, 2 Colorado Department of Transportation workers came across a woman's lifeless body down the side of an embankment on Highway 128 near the Boulder County-Jefferson County line. The woman had been bound, assaulted, and strangled. She was quickly identified as Betty Lee Jones. Even though she was last seen climbing into a stranger's car, suspicion still fell on her husband, Robert. Both the police and her family believed Robert was responsible. The police found no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, however, and they did not find the owner of the blue sedan, so the case went cold. In 2006, the case was reopened. DNA that was taken from Betty's body back in 1970 was then submitted to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The profile that was created was entered into the CODIS database, but no matches were made. The police had the idea of trying to see whether the DNA matched the DNA of Betty's husband, Robert. Since he had passed away in 2000, his parents had to give their DNA samples. After more DNA testing, it was confirmed that the DNA did not match Robert's, and he was ruled out as a suspect. Throughout the years, there were a lot of advances in DNA technology. In 2019, the DNA of the suspect was submitted to a private lab called Bode Technologies. They were able to create a more refined DNA profile. This allowed them to develop the family tree of the suspect. Eventually, it was narrowed down to 2 sons of a woman who they believed were closely related to the suspect. Only one of the 2 sons were still living. The other one was deceased in 1977. The living one was interviewed and DNA samples were taken. He told investigators that he had a different brother than the one that had passed away in 1977. His name was Paul, and the family last heard from him back in 1970, the same year as when Betty's life was taken. He also owned a blue sedan like the one Betty was last seen climbing into. After ruling out the brother who told them about Paul and the one that passed away in 1977, the investigators knew they had to locate Paul. In April 2020, they did locate Paul. They found him in Fort Logan National Cemetery. He passed away in June 2019. On April 8, 2020, his body was exhumed for DNA testing. Then, on April 24th, it was confirmed that Paul Leroy Martin's DNA matched the DNA collected from Betty's body. It is not believed that Betty and Paul knew each other. The police theorized that Betty climbed into his car that day, and at some point, he assaulted her, and ended her life. Sheriff Joe Pell had this to say: "In addition to our sincere thanks to CBI, the FBI, and all the contributing scientists and investigators, I would like to personally thank Detective Steve Ainsworth for his diligent work and tenacity for solving this very cold case, which was so brutally committed. Steve has a long career, much of it dedicated to cold cases, and he does a wonderful job for these victims and their families."